Namaskar and welcome once again, everybody. We are back with Achala ji, and we are continuing our series with the healing with the grahas, the navagrahas that we started. So, welcome Achala ji once again for this topic that we'll
Thank you,
be discussing
Tripathi.
today. So, this is very fascinating, and we have got great reviews for the series that we have been doing. And before we end this year of 2023, we said let's continue and let's do some more videos. So welcome, and I'm grateful that you have come here. So what is that we want to discuss? Which Navagraha we will be discussing today?
Namaste, Dr. Paji. It's
Namaste.
lovely always to discuss those things with you, and such an honor and such a pleasure for me. So I thought to myself, since we are beginning a new year, what a better really significator of new beginnings and new light in a way coming into our lives than Surya himself or Sun God himself. So I would really love to discuss a little bit about Surya, about Sun God. I have a little presentation prepared here, like for all the other grahas. And it's fascinating. We went through all the other planets that are very often of such a great concern to different people, but we didn't came up yet to actually the most important one, which is the very center of our solar system, around which all the other planets are revolving, which is of course Surya or Sun God. And this is something fascinating, truly, because sun is said to be this natural significator of our atma or our soul itself, which makes a perfect sense because where is the soul? Soul is at the very center of our being. And even if we can't always see it, feel it, or we can't really fully grasp it, yet still the soul is that around which everything in our life revolves, because without the soul at its center, we wouldn't be here. Without the spirit giving us power to breathe, we wouldn't be here. And Sangot is that around which everything else revolves, and also our very sense of identity of who we truly are, which sometimes can be attributed to wrong places. But at the very essence, what we are the soul, we are the Atma. And thus the sun, it's usually called in Vedic astrology to be the natural Atmakaraka, the very natural significator of this soul within us, the light within us. So of course, primarily sun represents that, our spiritual essence, the Atma. But also when sun's energy sometimes gets distorted through various gunas that of course have impact upon us, naturally this very sense of identity sometimes temporarily gets shifted from the king, from the Atma, to the servant, which is the mind or the ego. And this is of course where things start being a little bit less healthy. And this is also something that naturally, when we talk about the sun, it really naturally comes to our mind, like what is the very relationship between having a very healthy sense of confidence, because sun represents that, the confidence within us, the power, the energy within us. And then, of course, when we talk about it in spiritual context, then what is the relation between confidence and humility, right? And that's a beautiful thing because, especially in our world, I believe because we actually lack in Kali Yuga any, I would say, healthy external expression of power, right? In the previous yugas, people could look up to the kings and actually be inspired by them. But in our time, I think that there are plenty politicians out there by which we actually feel inspired, right? It doesn't work that way. We are, on the contrary, surrounded by plenty of very unhealthy expressions of power. And because of that, naturally, there is some form of rejection towards this very concept of power or confidence created in our mind, because we feel like there's something unhealthy, there's something wrong about this. But in reality, confidence and power are just the tools, of our soul self-expression, and they do not necessarily need to have negative connotations. They can be expressed in healthy ways. For example, the great power that yogis have does not lie in their ego or arrogance, but lies in their power of self-control. That is power in itself. and a great one, in fact. And even confidence itself, this is something that my Gurudev also often says, that in reality, if you want to be truly, authentically confident, you must be humble. There's no other way around it. Because the thing is that when we are proud and arrogant, and when on the contrary, when we are having this very low self-esteem and goes into this victim mentality, these are just like the two coins, two sides of the same coin, really. Because where usually arrogance and pride stems from is actually from insecurity, from our own need to prove something to someone, to show ourselves to someone in some specific light. But when we feel fully at peace with ourselves, with who we are and how we are, then it's not a problem for us to express ourselves exactly the way we are. And this is where the true confidence comes from, which I believe the real confidence and the real humility is not putting ourselves too high. It's not putting ourselves too low. It's actually just being content with how the things are. And this is where I believe one of the most beautiful qualities of the suns come through, which is the quality of truth, truthfulness, honesty, integrity, and authenticity as well. And very often in relation to the sun, we take those qualities and those words very cheaply in a very external way by believing that the sun is just about learning, how to speak the truth, how not to lie and avoid all those things, etc. But sun is much more than that. Sun is also the planet that is continuously trying to purify us and isolate this truth within us of who we are in our own essence. Because we do believe to be many things, sometimes because society imposed this on us, or somebody told us that we have to be like this, like that, or because we have our own delusions and deceptions in our mind. But so often we actually do not know who we are. We so often do not know what we truly want beyond what society tells us. And Sun is actually this planet that tries to continuously inspire us towards this search of who I really am. Like, what is this I even that I'm talking about? Is it just my mind? Is it just my ego? Just my body, my knowledge? Or perhaps this is something much more? So Sun is this planet that kind of continuously tries to isolate the truth. And that's why in practice, we sometimes experience during Sun's transits or Sun Mahadasha that there is some form of separation happening, or our mind sometimes becomes a little bit more strict about certain things, I would say, because the very devata that presides over Sun is Agni, the fire. And the main quality of fire is that it takes the matter, like if we throw anything inside the fire, it will either turn it into light or into dust. And that's pretty much the same quality of the sun. It reveals what's real, what's permanent, what's worth pursuing, and what is just very temporary and perhaps not that much worthy of our attention. And because of that, naturally speaking, the very quality and state of our sun in our birth chart is going to a huge extent also reveal not just the extent of the confidence that we have inside of us, but also how clear is our inner vision, how clearly we see things. And with clarity, I believe, always comes simplicity as well, which is another quality of the sun. Because if we are very clear about certain topic, it's very easy to explain it. I believe it was Einstein who said that if you can't explain something to a 5-year-old child, then you didn't truly understood that yet, right? And Sun is all about that. And for me to share my personal experience, since I was just now on a pilgrimage with my Gurudev in India, and during the pilgrimages, very often Guruji is encountering saints, and really holy personalities, but also scholars and pandits who perhaps are not yet there, to put it that way. An interesting thing is that you can always notice very clearly who is a true saint and speaks from one's direct experience and who is just a scholar. Because a scholar will always speak from the mind, not from a direct experience, from a direct perception. For example, that would be true to myself. I haven't seen God, I haven't seen the Atma, so I can only speak, from what I know from the scripture. But when a saint talks, they first of all speak in so simple words because they don't need to prove anything to anyone. They don't want to, be seen as extremely knowledgeable. They don't honestly care, about that at all. But at the same time, in this simplicity, there's so much clarity and depth that you feel so touched and inspired. Because in the very words that they speak, you feel like, wow, they have actually experienced that. They have felt God, they have seen God. And this is such a beautiful thing. And this is, I believe, one of the main qualities that Sun is trying to teach us, and the quality that got somehow lost, in our mainstream media those days. And that's the quality of integrity and authenticity, and knowing where we stand truly, and not trying to be higher or lower than that, but trying to be more real. That's what Sun appreciates. And from that comes both lots of power, comes lots of confidence, but also lots of creativity and freedom of self-expression. Because the moment we stop trying to be someone else, when we start to truly appreciate how God have created us and this divine spark inside of us, then it's much easier to express ourselves freely. And even though we are just in the beginning of this session, right now when I talk about it, I remembered one really beautiful exercise that my Gurudev gave, actually on a New Year's Eve, but like many, many years back, which I find to be a beautiful remedy for the sun, which is simply for 1 minute, first thing you wake up in the morning, for 1 minute, look into the mirror, look into your own eyes. And while looking into your own eyes, smile gently to yourself, and also just show gratitude and inwardly say to God, thank you for creating this, thank you for creating this uniqueness. Thank you for creating me the way I am. And I think that this is why Sun is such an important planet, especially in Vedic astrology and especially in the chart of astrologers. And we can so prominently see that, especially people who have in their dharma to actually guide others towards more clarity in life, they are often going to have very strong, especially Sun's nakshatras. They are going to be strongly activated there. And the Sun itself. Why? Because naturally, most people who come to Vedic astrology, actually, in my experience, somewhere subconsciously, they already feel actually what they would like to do in life, how they would like their life to look like. But because of this external conditioning, it feels for them like, no, I can't be my authentic self. I need to actually adjust to the expectations of my surroundings. But this is where astrology helps to realign a little bit of with who we truly are and really manifest that. This is also one story that actually my Gurudev said 1 year ago during the New Year's Eve, and it's also somehow really connected to the sun. He said, like, imagine God creates us in such a unique way, because everybody is so different. Everybody has unique talents, unique challenges as well. And then throughout our life, we are trying so hard to be someone else, actually, rather than just appreciating the uniqueness of ourselves. And then he said, imagine, like if you are so busy throughout your whole life trying to be someone else, then you die, you go, let's say, to meet God, if you're lucky enough, and the God will not even recognize you. He'll say, who are you? You're not the person who I created in the first place. You're someone else. And that's the thing, that sometimes we are so focused on the outside that we forget to find the inner beauty. And actually, healthy sun is all about appreciating this inner beauty, not in a proud way, not in an arrogant way, but in a way that it has been given to me by God, this unique type of light that I have. So let me manifest that. Let me appreciate that and see that. And needless to say, of course, if we talk about sun on a very physical and tangible level, sun, which is going to be in any way also afflicted, will also afflict also our external vision and generally the health, which makes perfect sense because if we refuse to see something in the outside, very often very unconsciously, naturally our vision, our eyesight will deteriorate as well. And this is a very well-known fact in the science of psychosomatics, that people who experience suddenly the eyesight that starts to deteriorate, they have a certain, how to say, unwillingness to actually face something in their lives the way it is. And sun is very much about our ability also to face things and confront things, which is why I believe sun was considered to be such an important karaka for our health as well, because the way we face things on the very physical level is our immune system. Whenever something comes into our system as something that is dangerous in any way, like a virus or bacteria, anything of that sort, the way we respond to that, how strong is this response, we can see also from the sun. And when sun is afflicted, then naturally this response might be either too weak, leading to various issues, or sometimes this response can be directed towards one's own self, which leads to autoimmune disorders in our times, especially. So, of course, from that perspective, healing our sun and getting in tune with it is, I would say, a very important thing for each of us to do, as it's such an important graha in our chart. So if we would just very briefly try to visualize or imagine how the journey with the sun looks like through the lens of the different gunas, same like we did with the previous grahas. Because of course, the energy of everything in this material world can manifest through the three different gunas: guna of tamas, guna of rajas, and guna of sattva. And when sun is tamasic, for example, which is a very unusual situation for the sun, right? Because it's a sattvic planet, it's a planet of light. So when sun is somehow obscured through the presence of the nodes or Saturn or just any type of association with tamasic grahas or signs, naturally such a sun will be experiencing a lot of insecurity because obscured sun cannot see its own light. It's like the sun behind the clouds. We know it's there, but we can't really see it. There's no clarity in that. So naturally, it results in insecurity. The Rajasic sun, on the other hand, which is a very passionate sun, will be very proud, can be overactive as well, because it's naturally, Rajoguna is fueling this inner fire a little bit too much. On the other hand, the Sattvic Sat will result in this very calm sense of confidence, without need to prove anything, without pride, without insecurity, without too low self-esteem, too high self-esteem, but just embracing the truth as it is. So if we would go fartherly into detail of what are the symptoms of those different suns, when sun is manifesting in a more tamasic way or some of its more tamasic qualities, first of all, you have very unclear self-image. We actually do not know ourselves really when sun is tamasic, and that can be often the biggest challenge from which everything else is stemmed. If we are very insecure, additionally, we will have increased need to control things, which is a very natural shadow side of sun. When sun becomes insecure, it tries to control circumstances, people, life, everything a little bit too much. The sun, which is also somehow insecure, will be more prone to manipulation and self-deception. Literally, it will sometimes, this is something that is often misunderstood, in a way like, how can we lie to ourselves? But we do, in fact, very often, just to feel better or just to maintain the status quo, just to stay in comfort zone. And sun in such a situation might definitely manifest those qualities. And of course, the biggest problem when sun becomes overly tamasic is that there is this underlying sense of unworthiness. And the sense of unworthiness comes from this, I would say, almost unhealthy relationship, not just with ourselves, but also with God as well, with the divinity inside of us. While when this sun from tamasic mode evolves into rajasic mode, it's like, very often I like to compare it to this classical example that is given in psychology, that we go from the sheep mode into the lion mode, which is also not great, you know, because when we go there, then we go from one extreme to another. So we try to cover up this entire insecurity that is still present there with pride, arrogance, unhealthy ambition, a little bit of disregard to others, too much of self-centeredness, even in more extreme cases, narcissism. But there is this very strong urge to dominate, to show ourselves up in some way, because we are mistaking in this state pride for actual confidence. We still don't have a very clear image of ourselves and who we are. But we somehow realize that being a sheep is not really working for us. So we say to ourselves, okay, let's be the opposite, let's be the lion. And very often where the actual growth starts and actual progress starts is when the sun starts evolving and starts realizing that actually being sheep and being lion doesn't make sense. How about I just am myself, you know, or instead of being any of those? How about I just embrace myself how I am? And of course, when sun also becomes sattvic, this natural sense of self-esteem, natural sense of confidence starts awakening. And in that confidence, humility is automatically present, because when we are truly confident, there's no need to prove anything to anyone. There's absolute truthfulness and integrity, and just full authenticity. There's freedom of self-expression, there's creativity into that. There's a lot of actual freedom into it. But also there is simplicity and clarity. Because we can notice that, especially when a native is somehow insecure, one of the main traits of that is that the person will try to overdo it, overdo many things. Very, very often, people come to me during astrology readings and they say, oh, you know, I have very big problem with perfectionism. I'm too big perfectionist. I'm focusing too much into this tiny little detail to the extent I have no peace of mind at all. But we need to realize, like, where the perfectionism comes from. It's funny because the main planet of perfectionism and details and all those things is naturally Mercury, who always hangs around the sun. It's always up there, somewhere around there, which means that sometimes, especially when Mercury is very close to the sun, then we are too attached to these external things, to the external details, how people see me, how I am externally. And precisely because of that, perfectionism comes in as a very useful temporarily defense mechanism, simply speaking, to allow us to feel a little bit better about ourselves. But the more true confidence and integrity grows, the more this need to prove anything to be perfect kind of naturally disappears. And we start being more simple, focusing on things that truly matter, which is also a big difference between sun and other grahas. Sun, since sun represents our very essence, the soul, the Atma, and its very Adidevata is also Agni, who is fire god, who separates the light from the dust. Naturally, sun is also trying to always make us more focused on what is truly important, not things that don't have that much importance. And this is a beautiful thing, because the moment we cultivate more this attitude of focusing on what's really important in life, then we stop engaging in activities that simply deplete our energy. And this is something that I believe is very important to hear, especially to all the students of Vedic astrology, because in Vedic astrology, we very easily sometimes tend to go under this influence of Rahu, and we go into these endless rabbit holes trying to find something incredibly meaningful there. But often we end up just not finding anything. While sometimes just going back to basics and actually just keeping in mind, like, how can I simplify things? How can I understand better already what's there? Can give much better results. So especially because astrology or Jyotisha is the science of light, I do believe that we as astrologers need to remind ourselves more and more often to be a little less like Rahu and more like the sun, actually, who is the very source of light itself. So this is something that definitely a very recently. So when we talk about avastas of sun or its different states, naturally, like all other grahas, sun can also experience different states. Of course, the most problematic, I would say, avasta for the sun is the ashamed sun, the Lajita avasta, because it's a very unnatural avasta for sun to experience, more than for any other planet, because sun represents our very sense of self-confidence. So when sun is actually conjunct with Ketu or Rahu, very often this sense of confidence is somehow distorted. And there is this very strong underlying insecurity that very often needs to be cured. And of course, this insecurity sometimes can straight and directly manifest as low self-esteem, but sometimes can be in a very crafty way, I would say, covered just by exaggerated ego, exaggerated arrogance. And especially whenever Ketu and Rahu are close to the sun, I would say that our ego as such can be very, very vulnerable and in many ways, and requires us to really heal it properly. But of course, when sun is too proud, too strong, like in state of exaltation or in Mula Trikona, naturally speaking, in state like this, sun is also going to manifest certain negative traits, but in slightly different way. Proud sun is, for example, more likely to show an actually genuine disregard, for others. Not something that, because sun sometimes when it's too proud is just so focused on one's own self and certain higher principle and ideals that person almost values those things more than actual persons, actual connection. That's why so often in Sun Mahadasha, we see that people experience divorces, different types of separations, etc., right? Because this is when suddenly our focus goes to the principles, to ourselves versus others, which can be very healing in many cases, of course. And yet, when sun is too proud, sometimes this focus on ourselves and how we want things to be can be a little bit too strong, of course. And then, of course, we have also the possibility of sun to experience agitation, but this is actually very rare for the sun, which is interesting because any other planet experiences Kshobita Avasta or agitation state just by being combusted by the sun. Sun, of course, cannot combust itself, but it can experience agitation in one scenario, and that is when it is being aspected by inimical cruel planet, which is Saturn, of course. So when Saturn is aspected by the sun, it's agitated because there's this natural polarity between them. Sun is all about the self, Saturn is all about this humility and others. Sun is about the truth. Saturn can value the truth in its very, I would say, healthy state, but Saturn also prefers to conceal things more, where Sun is more about self-expression. So of course, when Saturn agitates the Sun, I would say when Sun can manifest more of those qualities, even like anger, frustration, because this is when Sun becomes actually frustrated and agitated. Sun can also experience the sense of starvation while in conjunction with Saturn, or while in debilitation state as well, or also while in conjunction with any of the enemies, which is, of course, also Venus, who is so often so close to the Sun. This is where also Sun experiences that its energy is somehow depleted. But this is one thing actually that is somehow very both strange and unique about the Sun, I would say, from my personal observation. Because any other graha, when it undergoes the state of starvation, when its energy is depleted, in unfriendly Rashi or conjunct with an enemy, etc., then the energy of this planet is simply, of course, it is what it is. It's just starved. But how Sun behaves, because Sun is such a huge object in our sky, truly, and it's at the very center of our solar system. Very often what happens that when Sun goes through a starvation situation, like let's say it's in debilitation, the sign of Libra, that Sun will actually feed itself on the energy on the nearby Graha, especially if this Graha is actually combust. And because very often, again, Mercury ends up being in proximity, that's usually Mercury that pays the price for that. So when Sun is actually starving himself, he will be having also a certain amount of negative influence on Mercury as well. And this can often be especially seen on the physical level, that those planets that from which Sun is kind of sucking the energy in, to put it that way, they are going to make those body parts, those, let's say, elements of our body also suffer at the same time. And this is something I would say very, very, very unique about the Sun, is that it, due to its size, its amount of light, it also combusts other grahas. It actually also takes energies out of them. It makes them agitated as well. I remember one astrologer was saying that if you look at combustion itself as a state, he was comparing it to like when you throw the grains into the yagna fire, you sacrifice them. It's the same, like when the graha is very close to the Sun, it needs to sacrifice something in that moment. It sacrifices its qualities in order to sustain the self-image, the Sun itself, which often can prove to be not a very healthy ego defense mechanism, and it really sometimes requires from our side to look deep into that and figure out how to heal that part of ourselves. This is where we can most frequently see those so-called compensation mechanisms in our own psychology. So especially the planets being very, very close to the Sun, to the extent of being combust, I would pay a lot of attention to them and see if we are by any chance compensating something related to that grahas. Of course, when Sun is also in the rashis that are not supportive for him, he will be both starving and dormant. And also, when in the beginning of feminine Rashi or the very end of masculine Rashi, so this extreme degrees, extreme early or extreme late degrees, Sun can also go into this dying avasta, which is, especially for the Sun, somehow problematic, in a sense that when the Sun is especially so close to the boundary of a Rashi, it is actually also a Sankranti dosha. And it can have a particularly negative impact, especially on physical health. Because this is like, when the Sun is dying, it's like almost sometimes our system is literally defenseless because there's not enough energy inside. And especially Sankranti dosha, I would consider as quite a serious one. And normally what I advise people who have placement like that in a chart is to, because the system itself sometimes doesn't have enough, let's say, power, it's very important to keep giving, nutritions that actually boost this immune system, like literally lifelong, like almost a daily thing, not just something very temporary, because that usually indicates that simply there is not enough of this protective life force inside of us to help our body really to protect itself. So Sun is quite complex, I would say, from that perspective. And of course, every single case is so very unique, which is why even when I was thinking, like, what are the best things to uplift Sun, to heal our Sun in a very simple way, there were quite a few things that came to my mind, really, because it so much depends on the case. I would say that the easiest thing possible that one can do is simply meditate, visualize the light of the Sun either between your eyebrows or in your heart. And how to choose between those two, I would say, if you feel that your struggle is more with low self-esteem, focus on your eyebrows. Sun will help you to connect with that. But if you feel that your struggle is more with being perhaps too arrogant and not too much disregard to others sometimes, or too much pride, focus more on the sun in your heart. And of course, when we talk about the sun, the avatar of Lord Vishnu connected with sun god is Sri Ram himself. And it's so beautiful because the very name Rama means light within. Ra is the light mice inside of me. And so many saints say that actually just to connect with the divine inside of us, the simplest thing we can do is just chant the name of Rama. And additionally, also reading Ramayana as such can additionally serve as a very powerful remedy, because Sri Ram was the most beautiful embodiment of truth and how to live life, not just with truthfulness and integrity, but also this inner strength and confidence to meet any adversary in life, any challenge, any difficulty. And Sun naturally, because it's also a fiery planet, same like Mars, gives us that as well. Of course, when Sun is somehow suffering in a birth chart, it's also, I would say, not even an option, but an actual must to consciously practice honesty and authenticity, not just in our words, in our relations, also in our business, in our spirituality as well. Because again, like I was mentioning, external honesty and authenticity, so just being truthful in our words and in our dealings, is one thing. But to be honest and authentic from a spiritual perspective is something entirely else. It means to frequently dive deep within, introspect, and see all the different ways how our own mind is lying to us, how our own ego is lying to us. And that is, I would say, quite hard work, actually. And of course, it takes a lot of time. But I think it's a must, especially for natives who have weaker sun in a birth chart, to do this type of introspection, because it helps to slowly reach closer to this source of inner light within and see who we truly are, to just gain more clarity. And from that clarity, confidence will come very naturally. Of course, a very obvious thing is that aligning ourselves with sun's rhythm is always very supportive, which means, for example, things like waking up with sunrise and stopping to work after sunset. But this is something that from experience, I know that especially natives with a little weaker sun will have massive problem with, right? Especially waking up at early hours. But then at least the smallest thing we can do is like, for example, whenever we read any Sanskrit hymn, stotra, prayer, very often in Palashruti it's written to always take this prayer and repeat it 3 times during the day. And not just 3 random times. These are always the Sandhya times, the sunset and sunrise, and the midday as well. Because if we look at that, if we look, for example, where sun actually is during these different times of the day, at sunrise, it's always the 1st house. Sunset is the 7th house, and midday is the 10th house, which are, externally speaking, 3 most important Kendra houses in our birth chart, the very pillars of our existence. And at least the smallest thing we can do from our side, if we want to benefit from this healing solar energy, is to, at these times of the day, at least to recite our mantra a couple of times. Or if there is some particular affirmation, intention that we wish to manifest, we can also do that while actually facing the sun. Facing the sun in the east during sunrise, in the south during midday, and in the west during sunset. This is actually how normally in Vedic times prayer was done at the 3 sacred times during the day. But I think that perhaps out of all of these remedies, the one that is maybe the most easily available and something that we can do right here, right now, is actually just reducing unnecessary things in our life, removing unnecessary things in our lives. Sun is actually also the significator of renunciation as well, moving closer to the divine. But in our actual daily life, Sun is just reminding us to practice more simplicity, minimalism, avoid distractions, and keep your focus clear on what is that you wish to manifest in your life. And that is, I believe, one of the most important lessons from Sun God, and perhaps the most important one for us to remind ourselves of, especially at the end of a new year, not the end of new year, the end of the old year and beginning of new year, when we are about to enter something new and we want to manifest some new quality in our life, we need to be also ready to turn the page. And we need to be ready also to remove certain things from our life that actually don't serve us anymore. Separate this light from the dust, like Agni or fire is teaching us. So I'm really curious, what you have to say about Angat.
Achalaji, whenever you talk, I don't speak because I want to just soak myself in the, this consciousness of higher wisdom that just flows. And I don't want to disrupt that flow whenever you go on because, you just want to sit there and absorb all of that whenever, things are going on. So, yeah, I want to say every little word that you brought in with the simplicity and with the clarity today on the Surya is I have to say it was wow. I'm sure anybody who has no interest even in astrology would be able to absorb this level of information about the Surya. And I for some reason I always believe that Surya, Aditya, whatever we say, I somehow compare Surya with the Sudarshana. And I say Sudarshana because Su means which is divine, okay, which is, and Darshana means vision. And it is only the sun who gives you, I mean, the moon as well, but the luminaries, amongst the luminaries in the day, the original source of light always comes from the divine, and he always gives you darshan every day in the morning, regardless whether you like it or you don't. So he is Pratyaksha Devata, which means he's always there and he rises every day. But how many of us look at it as a divine darshan that we are going to get, a vision that we are going to get. So I think he embodies that he brings in and removing all kinds of blemishes, sins, providing you vitality. Imagine if you have no sun, then what about vitamin D3 that we need essentially? Now, I made a post on my social media accounts yesterday where I was just trying to interpret the entire Gita in a very short way for somebody to understand. Of course, you cannot interpret Gita in very shortly, but how I would probably see this is I believe in my interpretation, I said Gita is the yoga of life, which was given on a battlefield. It was not given in the comforts of a Gurukulam, or it was not given in the comforts of a palace, or in peace. It was given on a battlefield. And battlefield and the highest knowledge flowing is always considered to be Sagittarius sign. That is where you can have a battlefield also, and you can have the highest level of knowledge being the natural ninth house and the inner conflicts that we have. So I was just trying to see the analogy and comparing it with how Surya plays a very important role. So the chariot on which, because see, every Gita Upadesh, you just don't see Arjuna and you don't see Krishna just giving the discourse. It is also the chariot is of importance there. And they are not sitting inside the chariot, they come outside the chariot and they are standing down and he's giving the Gita. And everything is like frozen, everything around them is what is happening. It is kind of frozen or paused, and he's just giving that discourse. So I was just seeing the analogy that the chariot itself is like the physical body. Arjuna is a passenger, like we are all here on this journey. And he's also the manas, which is the mind, which is very, very agitated when Arjuna's mind. And it also represents, Arjuna represents the Atma, the experiencer. And Krishna here is the consciousness, it's the thoughts. He's also the Paramatma, which means he's trying to show the light to the Atma. He is also trying to give him a context through to the mind, which is Arjuna, through the thoughts. And then we can see the whole thing that is happening and not nobody really realizes is the Gita was actually meant not for Arjuna, apparently, because Arjuna forgets what was given to him on the battlefield. It is said that the Gita was narrated to the Prana Devata, who is Hanuman, who is sitting on the flag of the chariot. Now, that means here we have the Atma, which is Arjuna. We have the Paramatma, which is Krishna. He's the charioteer. He's the one who decides where the chariot has to go, which means our Rath. Rath means our physical body. So it is a vehicle. And the Pranavayu, which is Hanuman, is sitting as a flag on that, and he's giving, infusing the energy to the soul and giving life force energy there. So this whole thing which is happening is a yoga of life. I feel it is also about the interaction which is happening between the sun and the darkness. The sun is showing Krishna, Shri Krishna as the sun. He is giving this divine vision, and the consciousness, which is Krishna's consciousness, is imparted in a very beautiful
that's really beautiful, you know, what you shared, Dr. Paiji, and I can really relate to that a lot. In fact, even in Katha Upanishad, it's there's this beautiful comparison that actually our body is like a chariot, and then who is riding in a chariot is the Atma. The actual driver is Buddhi, or the intellect.
Yes.
The reins are the manas, and then the horses are the senses, right?
Senses.
So normally what happens is like that our chariot is basically just being carried out by the senses, and if our Buddhi is, let's say, intelligent enough, then we will be having certain amount of control over it. But what happens in the Gita is that Arjuna somehow realizes that I can do nothing myself, really. I can do nothing by myself. Even my buddhi itself is not enough to actually win this battle, to engage in this challenge. So he just gives these reins of his chariot to Krishna and let the God, like you said, let Paramatma guide me. And it's very, very beautiful what you share, Dr. Paiji, from that perspective, because especially Gita, I believe, brings so much clarity. And in fact, when I was preparing this presentation right now, I was thinking, you know, particularly about the 16th chapter of the Gita, which is a really interesting one. So 16th chapter is called the demonic qualities and the godly or divine qualities within us. But Krishna basically talks about, for few first verses only, about what are the divine qualities, and the rest of the chapter are demonic qualities. And then Krishna gives, interestingly, his, let's say, definition or understanding of what is delusion, what is fantasy. And of course, we would think that it's something, you know, like, oh, maybe a person is very ungrounded, going to fantasy. But no. His definition of fantasy and delusion is like when a person wakes up in the morning and thinks, I am the doer, I have this, I have that, I have accumulated this, I have accumulated that, I'm so powerful, so successful, and I did it all alone, and I will get more and more the next day. And when we think about it, actually, this is like, I would say, the thinking, you know, the mind of like roughly 90% of society, right? Like this is the type of thinking, like successful thinking, right, that we are all encouraged to do. But Krishna says this is pure delusion and fantasy, because time can take everything from you just like that. You have no control over that. Whatever you received is divine grace, and of course the result of your karma to a certain extent. But that's a fascinating thing, because like even if we think about the very idea of self-discovery and authenticity, it means something so vastly different from mundane perspective and spiritual perspective, actually. And Krishna definitely in Bhagavad Gita sets the bar for all of us very, very high. That's for sure.
See, that's again was an analogy that I was also thinking. That is what you beautifully said as well, Achalaji. See, what I was in the final stages of Mahabharata, when the war is over, everybody, there is bloodshed, many people have become, uh, many women have become widows. There were, children who have become orphans. Many people have lost, who have survived are also, lost their arms or limbs or whatever. There is a lot of suffering everywhere. The whole story at the end, what happens is Krishna looks at Arjuna when the entire battle is over, and he says, please get off the chariot. And Arjuna says, no, I want you to get off the chariot first. So Krishna says, no, just act as I say, you get off the chariot first. So he walks out of the chariot. Then next, Krishna steps out, and then he instructs Hanuman to step out of the chariot. And as soon as Hanuman leaves the flag and he steps out, the entire chariot burns to ashes and it becomes dust. And Arjuna is really shocked. Arjuna says, what has happened? What is this evil force which has destroyed our chariot? And Krishna tells him, the chariot was burnt a long time ago. It is Narayana who is sitting with you on the chariot. And you have Hanumanji, who is the life force energy, was sitting on the chariot, is holding this till this event has happened. And eventually, what you see is this is how I think life also comes and we also leave. So it is the Atma which probably leaves first. Then it is the consciousness which is there, which is Paramatma, which is Krishna. He steps out. And then finally, the prana vayu, which leaves finally, which makes the body dead. And then that body has no other go but to go to the funeral pyre and to become dust. So
I really love this story. Actually, this is like one of my favorite ones, really, because it beautifully illustrates that, really, and there is actually lots of these really, I'd say, interesting stories that happen after the war, after Mahabharata war, and one of the other that Guruji often shares is about Barbarika. And that's really amazing one, because Barbarika, basically speaking, it's a long story, but just to cut it short, he had this strange blessing to be beheaded by Krishna. That was his actual way. He wanted to still see and witness the war, to just see Krishna's glory and grace and how it unfolds. So Krishna just placed his head, but he kept his head alive, so he can, from the top of the hill, observe the whole war. And then the story goes that after the Mahabharata war, the Pandava brothers, even after they already saw what Krishna can do, I mean, Arjuna literally had divine vision of Krishna already, right? Yet still, they so easily came back to this delusion, so-called, of attributing this action to themselves. So a little pride awakened inside of them. And they were talking with themselves, like when they were walking up this mountain where Barbarika was, along with Krishna, they were talking, oh, I did this and I did that. And once they reached Barbarika and were passing nearby, Barbarika just started to laugh, like very, very hard. And of course, Pandavas thought that maybe he just went a little crazy standing there, just as a severed head. But then Krishna silenced them, and Krishna said to Barbarika, what did you see when the Mahabharata war took place? And Barbarika said, what I saw is no warriors fighting. It was just your Sudarshan chakra doing everything. And it was just Mother Kali drinking all the blood. it was all happening for God's will. And this is when actually also Krishna addressed Arjuna and told him, you really think that your weapons are powerful enough to kill great personalities like Bhishma or Drona? It was my Sudarshan chakra under each of your arrows. That's why you were protected. And this is the fascinating thing, the obvious truth hidden in plain sight, that actually without the breath, without the grace of God, we can't do anything. It's there, but it's so easy for us to get into this habit of identifying ourselves with our ego and just taking the credit for everything, that naturally you forget about that very easily.
This is also very fascinating that you said, because I have also heard of this story, Achalaji, of Barbarica and all of this. It's very, very fascinating. And another incident, which also when you're talking about the sun, which comes from our Itihasa, is Ramayana. See, Rama's Ayana. Ayana means, we know, Uttarayana, Dakshinayana, which means it's the journey of the soul. So Ramayana is, as you said, Ra is the light, Ma is the inner light within us. It's the journey of the inner light is what Ramayana is all about. And you see, there are so many things that you will observe in Ramayana. If you bring an analogy again, and I'll explain how the sun is important here. And you said, Rama is even Parashara Rishi in Brad Parashara Ora Shastra, he says amongst the Dasha avatars, Ram is associated with the sun, the Surya. Now, it takes me to the event of the Swayamvara of Sita at Janaka's kingdom. So there is the Shiva's bow, which has been left with Janaka by Parashurama, and he goes away for safekeeping. And Janaka says, anybody who can, lift this bow would be able to, he's just said lifting the bow or move that bow from there would be the best suitor for my daughter. Now, interestingly, Rama was the only one amongst all the suitors who not only lifted that bow, he also stringed it and he also broke that bow. Now, if you see, this whole episode gave me a different interpretation of the Itihasa. Now, as soon as he broke that bow, there are three phases of it, and I will explain. The first phase is as soon as he broke the bow, there was a thunderous sound, and then Parashurama from somewhere comes raging into the Janaka's kingdom with his axe, and he has already slayed 21 lineages of Kshatriyas, or they say 21 times over, however you interpret 21. And he thinks it is another Kshatriya who is there, which is, Rama. Comes raging in with this thing to axe the Kshatriya. He was very much, who is the one who, dared to do this thing? And as soon as he comes facing to Rama, he loses all his divine powers because he realizes there is Atma which is standing in front there, which is the epitome itself, which is the God himself, which is Vishnu's reincarnation. Can you see what I mean? So that itself is a great way of understanding that what combustion means. Whenever a planet, because Parashurama is like Shukra, as per Parashar Rishi, when Shukra comes in close proximity to the Surya himself, he becomes combust or he loses some of his own powers. So basically, he recognizes that there is another version of me who has come here, and my avatar is fading out or is going to be phased out, or my karmas here is over. My avatar is over. So he then has only one thing, which is Pashyatap. And he wants to go from there. So this explains how Venus and Sun, when they come together, what combustion happens. The other thing is, before Rama's avatar, most of the kings, polygamy was very much accepted. But breaking of the bow is an indication of breaking of traditions of many, many, many generations, where he says, I'm going to just be with one woman. And that breaking of the bow was breaking of a tradition of multiple marriages. Otherwise, today, men could have multiple wives. You have also seen in Mahabharata, one wife with multiple husbands, or one king with multiple wives. Rama was the first who broke that tradition. And breaking of the bow was breaking of that tradition. Do you see? These were the interpretations we are making. Sure, you can make so many such interpretations, but the message is very clear in the Itihasas.
Yeah, this is very, very beautiful what you are sharing, Dr. Paiji, because I think especially this meeting of Parashuram and Shriram is so incredibly symbolic, right? Especially because literally when Parashuram is meeting Shriram, he realizes, like you say, that my job is over here, basically speaking, and he gives even his own divine bow to Shriram.
Exactly.
And that is a very significant thing. He kind of sacrifices himself and handles his power to the sun, which I believe to a certain extent does happen when Venus is approaching the sun very, very closely. It realizes that my power here is over and I need to align now with higher purpose. I need to really align with higher purpose and rather support the sun, which is why so often I have seen that people who have like this deep combustion of Venus in their birth chart, that perhaps some aspects of these Venusian qualities, like being very into sensual pleasures, entertainment, etc., perhaps won't be present. But the alignment with the divine, the devotion, the creativity will be so abundantly present, because this is where Venus is fueling the very sun's energy. So it's not like it's always a very detrimental thing to have such a, let's say, combination in a chart, but rather for us, again, I would say to just embrace it the way it is and to understand it's part of our destiny in this lifetime, that our Venus will just sacrifice some of its energy for the sake of the sun, but that will help us to be truly who we have to be. And that doesn't necessarily need to be always a bad thing. It
Yes.
can actually also become the cause of success.
And I think what he sacrificed is his krodha, which means his anger, and his
Yes,
outer image. Whenever a planet gets combust, its outer image is burnt, but
yes,
not the inner. You can never burn what is inside.
exactly.
So
Yes.
that is enhanced, but the outer imagery is completely given. So I think he actually elevated himself and then he decided to go into tapasya,
Yes.
Parashurama. And
And, and,
Parashurama
and
is
this and, and
spirited.
this is
He never dies.
actually, I believe that only after meeting of Shriram, if you look at that from that perspective, is that Parashuram only after meeting of Shriram started to truly manifest higher qualities of Venus,
Exactly.
compassion, forgiveness. He realized, my goodness, I was angry all this time for nothing. It's time to actually, for me to meditate, to atone for my sin, practice compassion, practice
Passion.
forgiveness, not violence. This is where also sage Varahamihira says that every planet which gets in touch with the sun or gets combusted by the sun, it's like we are throwing gold into fire. Sure, gold is going to suffer, but at the same time, all its impurity is going to be removed and it can
Absolutely.
shine.
And this is again seen in the entire Ramayana, which is the story of
Mm,
Surya, I feel, in the presence of Rama, where
mm.
so many people were absolved, whether it is, Ahilya, whether it was Shabari, whether it was Jatayu, all of these people's lives transformed and they all achieved moksha, including Ravana. Because of, taking up a battle or whatever interactions that you have with Surya, it is definitely going to realign your life and would probably take you onto the path of the higher divine knowledge.
When you are actually mentioning Ravana, Dr. Paiji, it reminds me there is this one story that my Gurudev loves to share from the moment when Ravana actually is already dying on the battlefield after he has been shot by Sri Ram. And actually, this is where I believe the greatness of Sri Ram character and his humility and confidence at the same time show up. Because in the moment when Ravana is about to die, he has been shot by an arrow, he says to his brother Lakshmana, please go to Ravana, ask him for his knowledge, ask him for his wisdom. He might have been our enemy, he might have had evil tendencies, but he had immense knowledge, and this knowledge is going to die with him. Go and ask him for that. So Lakshmana goes, but Lakshmana has his character. He's a little bit arrogant. He sees only enemy of Rama in Ravana. So he stands, he asks very like almost arrogantly Ravana to give him the knowledge, but Ravana just turns his head away. He's not speaking to Lakshmana. And then Lakshmana comes back to Sri Ram and says, he won't speak to me. Then Rama asks him, how did you approach him? Where were you standing? Lakshmana says, I was standing at his head. And then Rama himself goes and he stays at Ravana's feet so Ravana can see him. And he's requesting Ravana, please give this knowledge to my younger brother. Please give this knowledge to me as well, so it does not die with you. So he was not just having this confidence, but also an immense respect to everyone. Doesn't matter whether it's his enemy or not. And I believe this is also how we can see the healthy sun in one person, that there will be always the immense respect to everyone. It doesn't matter one's social status, whether one's friend or enemy, but this great respect, respecting the divine light in another, regardless of external circumstances.
Oh, this is so beautiful that we have talked a lot about. I know we can keep going on like this, Achala, but it's the New Year Eve, and I think everybody is going to start with the New Year. Although for us it is not the New Year. Our New Year's always start with Chaitra Masa, or whenever sun enters into Aries sign for many of them. So, but for whoever celebrates, it's all about that inner awakening, the healing of the inner vision, as you mentioned here, uplifting that inner Atma and its journey. I also said we are all here on this journey, and we have been given this vehicle which has a definitive expiry date, but we all have a very unique number plate. There is no two number plates which will be alike. So that means you are a very unique form of the divine light which is here, and everything that is manifesting from you is the highest divine, insignia, I would say. So that means you are very unique, but you are a part and parcel of the divine light, which is the Surya himself. So you are the ray of light which is here. We also have this vehicle has a definitive expiry date, but the soul is always immortal. The soul has many journeys. It will get many vehicles in his life, and karmic imprints are carried forward. So I think that was great to have you here and discuss such an important thing before we end this year. So I'm very grateful to you, Achala.
Thank you so much, Dr. Paiji. It's always such a pleasure to discuss with you. Thank you.
Namaste. Thank you.